What happens when your children's school uses its assemblies as a platform for religious indoctrination? How much discretion do head teachers have in the content of school assemblies? And is Christian worship still appropriate in an increasingly multicultural and non-religious society? You're listening to the National Secular Society podcast, hosted by Emma Park. Today I'm going to be answering these questions by looking at a case study. This concerns a primary school in which stories from the Bible were taught as the literal truth by church representatives as part of a weekly assembly. The school in question was Burford Primary School in the Cotswolds. I'm joined now by Lee and Lizanne Harris, whose children attend the school, to tell me about their experiences in resisting its enforced evangelizing. So, first of all, Lee and Lizanne Harris, thank you very much for joining me on the National Secular Society podcast. So, you're here to tell us about your experience in opposing the collective worship requirement or difficulties with it in your local school. So, could you tell us a bit about which school it was that you were sending your children to and what happened?
Okay, our children, they still currently attend the school. It's called Burford Primary School, and it's based in Burford, Oxfordshire in the Cotswolds. It is a state school with no religious character to it. However, it does form part of the Academy Trust of ODST, which is Oxfordshire Dyson Trust, Schools Trust.
How much influence does the ODST have over the character of the schools within the trust?
So we can only say anecdotally, Emma. Before the trust got involved, so that our children have been involved in the school for longer than the trust has been involved with the school. So the collective worship piece, which is primarily the crux of our case, existed before the academy, before the trust came in. All we can say is that a large part of our objection and what led to our case is that it is a non-religious school led in a Christian way. So, in other words, the language that is used in classes and in assembly and throughout the school is Christianity is basically the true religion. The Christian God is the one true God, and there was no dilution of that within the school. And when the trust came into play, in our view, it was just solidified.
Okay, so let's just take it back a bit. When you were looking for a school for your children, were you specifically looking for a non-faith-based school?
Yes, we were looking for a non-faith-based school. We are in the Cotswolds, and our catchment area, you only tend to have one school in your catchment area. So for us, Burford Primary School, it was across the road from us. We were in catchment. All of their friends would go to that school. So for us, that's what we were looking for in a school. And the fact that it was it had no religious character to it. The other schools that sit in the surrounding villages, it might be worth noting, are C of E schools. So that's our choice, really. We either had Burford Primary School, which was in catchment area, or we had to look outside catchment area, and it would be the next, I think, 3 schools in the catchment, in the surrounding villages are Church of England schools.
Okay, and how many children do you have at the school?
We have two children at school.
And could you maybe just say, so you thought this was a non-religious school, so you sent your children there. Then what happened?
So after we raised it with the teacher, she confirmed that every Wednesday, the volunteers from the church, St. John the Baptist, would come in and teach Bible stories to the children. Which kind of raised alarm bells to us, because we, like I said before, we didn't know that this collective worship law existed. So it was quite a shock to us to find out that this was being done in a non-religious school.
And this was happening in the assemblies, was it?
In the assemblies every Wednesday morning.
Okay. And who exactly was coming in from the church to teach them?
So they are volunteers from the church, and they form part of a group called the Open Book. Apparently, it's quite it's a national group. They've got a website and everything like that, and they form sections or groups in churches and then go to the local schools to teach the open book assemblies.
So it's worth saying, Emma, the two things. Firstly, the school didn't openly communicate to the fact that that the church did come in regularly on a Wednesday. I think that was the first thing. The second thing was we learned that there was no dilution to the language. In other words, they were going in and positioning Christianity as truth. It wasn't some people believe or Christians believe. It was exerted very heavily as truth. And the third part is that some of the language that was being replayed to us was what we consider to be remarkably divisive, which is kind of what triggered our move to remove the children in the first place. So it would be language along the lines of the fact that they were being raised for life in a Christian country, which isn't a tone of voice or language that we would expect to come from a non-religious school.
So what sort of stories were they telling the children? Do you have any examples?
So they would do the story of Noah was one, the Easter story of the crucifixion.
But they were active. I think the issue
they're also acted, so they're not just telling the stories. Bear in mind, they're telling the Bible stories as truth and as fact that they actually happened, but they're also acting out the stories as well.
So this is for primary school, so small children, and they're telling them that the story of Noah actually happened.
And it's from reception age as well, so that's from 5 years old.
And also, so Emma, if you took away just that basic principle on its own, part of the reasons why it escalated, number one, it was conveyed as truth. That was our first initial issue. Number two, some of the way in which it was acted out was quite graphic. So, for example, things like they were the Good Samaritans, where somebody gets beaten, or the crucifixion. So that they, in some instances, we learned that the form tutor needed to tell a watered down, nicer version of the story to the children before they get sent into the assembly in preparation for what they were about to see. So my view is if you need to do that in the first place, if you have to dilute your message so massively, number one, it's the wrong message. And number two, we didn't only want this conveyed to our kids didn't want it conveyed as truth. Secondly, we thought the way it was done was massively inappropriate for their age.
Sure. So, I mean, you said beatings in the case of the Good Samaritan. How was that acted out?
Well,
we got it second hand. I mean, it's only from the children.
We were never allowed to go. We had when we raised it with the teacher and then escalated it to the head teacher and asked to go in and sit on one of these assemblies, we were told no, we weren't allowed, because if they allowed us to go in and sit on this assembly, they would then have to allow parents to go in and sit in on subjects such as maths and English. So they kind of likened it to the curriculum, which it's not part of the curriculum.
Have you ever since been allowed into an assembly?
No, although now part of the result of our case is that parents, should they wish to go in and sit in on one of these assemblies, they are now allowed to.
The important point, Emma, I think on that one is when we did ask initially, we were basically told a polite version of it's not our concern and they'll teach their kids as they see fit. It's only as a consequence of what's been a reasonably long legal process that part of the concession that they've offered is that parents are now welcomed to go in and sit in on them. Okay,
so let's take your story a bit further then. So having learned this, what did you first do?
So first of all, we raised it as a complaint to the head teacher. And she came back and said basically what Lee had just said, that it wasn't really our concern. She was acting within the law, and she was allowed to do it.
Well, was it the head teacher's decision to have it?
Yes, it's the head teacher's decision to do this. So then we escalated the complaint to the head of governors, and she basically sided with the head teacher. and didn't think that we had any. It wasn't a.
Well, we were told there was no conversation. Yeah, there was no conversation. We basically the line that we were hit with repeatedly was the collective worship law exists. Therefore, as a school, it is at the head teacher's discretion, and therefore she is operating within the law. And we were.
And our option was to withdraw.
Yeah, our only option.
Our only option was to withdraw the children, which is what we did. Us and another 2 families at that point withdrew the children from the collective worship assemblies.
Okay, so you and 2 other families withdrew your children from the assemblies once a week.
At that stage.
And what was the effect of that? Why were you unhappy with that?
Yeah, we were unhappy with it because, number one, we don't want to exclude our children from any sort of activity that the school are doing, or to make them feel excluded because their classmates are going off to an assembly and then they're having to stay back behind with the teacher and not really do anything. It was fine at that time because there was they were allowed to all stay together in the same class, but I don't know what changed. And then as they got older and more people removed their children, they were all then separated again out into their own classrooms. So it's different age groups. So rather than the children that were going to go see the open book assembly, they were all together. And rather than keeping the withdrawn children together, they then chose to separate them out again, which we were really unhappy with.
How did your children react to this?
Do you know what we've said? We've had a lot of interviews on this when of course the case was still undecided, and we've said repeatedly we're really lucky with our kids. I think fundamentally, if you ask them how they felt in school, they weren't nuts about it. I mean, I think they felt a little bit excluded because literally they were being put in a side room at that time. You've got to remember this has played out over a lot of years. So when they were little, to an extent they didn't understand quite so much. As they've got older and they've got a little bit more savvy and they've questioned it, they don't want to be part of it, or they've elected themselves not to be a part of it. We've always ensured that they've had the choice. But as Lizanne said, the sad bit for them really was the necessity for them to be excluded. And whereas a lot of our cases hinged upon our right, or the kids' human right, to a meaningful alternative, let's not forget what forces that in the first place. What first is the collective worship law is a divisive law, because the second you say that Christianity needs to be observed as truth within that school, you can of course withdraw your children, but it forces their withdrawal. It forces the alternative, and there are many schools that have got a remarkable amount of diversity in bigger cities, clearly, than the Cotswolds, where they do manage to run assemblies without exerting one religion as truth, and they manage to run them inclusively. And that was our recurring point with the school. It is at your discretion. You can change it, and you can choose to include our children, but you're not.
What was your sense among other parents? Were most of them happy with the way that the worship was carried out?
Well, a lot of them didn't even know it existed. Again, like ours, it's not something you look at when you're looking at primary schools. There is a contingency of Christians in this area, so to them it wouldn't. I can't imagine that it would be an issue for them. You have the parents that also, like us, aren't happy with it, but won't withdraw their children because they don't want their children to feel excluded. And there were quite a few parents in that school that wouldn't do that. And only up until I think it was last March, April time, when we made it more aware to parents that this was still going on, that then other parents did decide to take their children out. And again, there was a parent last year who had a daughter in year 6 who was livid when she found out that this was going on. She'd been there for 7 years, and it took for another parent to tell her about this assembly for her then to remove her children as well. So I think you've got quite a mixed batch of parents there.
Yeah, so basically the school is giving you a really invidious choice. Either you have to, the children have to be exposed to this very sort of evangelical Christian worship, or they're excluded. And did you notice the Christian worship having an effect on your children while they were undergoing it, or have any parents said that they've noticed
Well,
on their children?
it was the stories where they said that they were coming home and said God created the world, and it's like, well, in 7 days, and then it was, or that there was the years ago, no, this man called Noah lived to be 800 and he saved all the animals, and it's just stories like that. Well, they're nice, they're okay stories, but they're not truth, and that's what we had to do. We had to then unpick that from what the school was telling them, which we don't want as parents, we don't want to do.
But we don't want to be in a position where we're contradicting the school that we send our children to be educated and informed in. That was the first thing. The best we had available at the moment, again, I still see this as, despite our case, a consolation prize. We have to remove them. We have to take them out away from their friends somewhere else. So I do think it affected them. I think it's naive to say that it didn't affect them. But again, this has played out over a very formative age, over a 7-year period. So we've just had to make sure that we do our part as parents to balance that conversation, and in many cases that's meant contradicting the school that we send them to.
Oh yeah, a very, very uncomfortable situation to be in.
And for the children again, and we raised this time and again with the head teacher and the governors long before we went down the legal process, and that was to say, in the eyes of the children, if a grown-up is saying it, as far as they're concerned, on behalf of the school, they are going to take it. We are telling them, we ask them to listen to their teachers. We ask them to go to school to learn. So in their view, it's another grown-up in the context of the school, if it is a member of the clergy, telling them there's something which is true. And it's very, very difficult to unpick that, or to explain to children of that age that line. It wasn't one occasion. This has played out over a long period of time.
So how many times per year would they go to the church?
So they have the Easter service, which is in obviously April, March time. Then you've got the Harvest Festival, which is in October time, which again, if you were to go back to the origins of these festivals, they're not actually Christian festivals. They stem back hundreds and thousands of years before Christianity came in. So for us, again, they say they're teaching the children the meaning of the Harvest Festival and the meaning of Easter. Well, they're not really. They're teaching the children the Christian part of that festival.
And also things like the part of what you would have seen played out in the press, things like the things which we have managed to get turned around, things like the Leavers Assembly, for example, was held at the church. And so at the end of that, the children's time within the school, one of the objections we raised was they were given a Bible at the back end of them leaving school,
at the Leaders' Assembly,
and we're told this is your guide for life. When you leave school, if you're ever not sure about anything, you turn to this book. That was the leaving. That's the leaving present on the back end of their entire education over that period. Now we've managed to. That's one of the areas where we've been successful, and we're grateful for that. That we've got that overturned. I hope, and I know that we've challenged their thinking in that regard. But there were 100 instances, Emma, where I think we can point to where it was just not essential or appropriate to use the church. It just became the default because of the relationship that existed.
Yes, and then what really took the biscuit for us last year was when the head teacher, from what I can tell, received a phone call from the church to say that they had a guy called Warren Furman. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Warren Furman. He was Ace from the Gladiators back in the 90s. And he was going around touring schools, giving assemblies.
And what's his story?
He is a evangelical ministry who's you go on his website, his sole purpose is to turn people and children to Jesus. Now, bearing in mind that we had already removed our children from these sort of assemblies, our children and the other children that had been removed were made to attend this assembly. Even our children raised their hands and said, I don't think we should be going to see this man. And the head teacher said, no, you have to go to this assembly. And there was no communication to parents that he was coming to the school. There was no learning objectives associated with his visit. He was not told that there were children of different beliefs in this school, so his language was definitely not tapered. We only found out about it when the children came home and told us that a gladiator had been to see them at school.
The remarkable thing about this, sorry to chime in on here, but the remarkable thing for us, right, that's all incredibly valid. The thing which really stood out like a sore thumb to us was this was still a visitor, right, a visitor unknown to the school. There was no research, there was nothing taken through the visitors policy. This was a grown man unknown to the school allowed to come in and talk directly to the children, just based upon the association with the church. Nothing else, no other process. And these are all things which, when we started to address the relationship between the church and the school, as parents, we were again batted away more times than I can count. This is the relationship that exists. We weren't ever. Our concerns were never given credence. We were always told, along with the collective worship law and along with the human rights of our kids for an alternative, we were told repeatedly, there's no conversation to be had here. It didn't matter how far we escalated it and how many governors we sat in front of, the answer was still the same.
So you eventually went to High Court with this. How many years did you try to challenge the school within the school body or the governing body before you went to?
We were constantly saying this isn't right. Something's got to change here, because we then removed our children from like the Easter service and the Harvest Festival. Now these festivals can go on for like an hour and a half. Now I had conversations with the class teachers and said, look, they're not going to the Harvest Festival in October. They're going to be in your care for an hour and a half. They can't just be left to their own devices. They need to have some sort of activity that's of educational worth. And the teachers seemed fine with it. But then when I went to go collect the children at 3:00 at pickup time, they'd been left in a meeting room on iPads for an hour and a half with the teaching assistant. Now, that for me, I could have taken them home early and given them an education myself, not for them just to be sat there. So that was the kind of crux. They need to now have, it's not good enough for them just to be sat in a room. They need to have an education. They are in your care from 9:00 in the morning to 3:00 in the afternoon. It is your duty as a school to educate our children.
So basically what you're saying is there just was no provision for any...
No, absolutely no provision. And when we questioned it with the head teacher, she turned round to us and said that it was down to us to provide an education for the children during that period of time, which again we escalated to the governors, and the governors then ruled it would be discriminating to the other children that go to the festivals if our children got an education at that time, which was just bizarre.
So Emma, you part of your question was what led us to that. So what Lizanne's just described was between the events with Warren Furman, I think was probably one trigger point.
Yeah.
Second trigger point was the Harvest Festival when the kids were just left for an unacceptable period of time with no education at all. Again, just left in a side room. I then wrote a piece. This is probably our introduction to the NSS. I wrote a blog piece about our experiences, and if I'm being very candid, Emma, I'm not entirely sure if we ever did it with a view to it getting any real response, but we did want to share it because we thought we knew that there was a conversation to be had here.
We had also, just to be clear, been in touch with the NSS to say, look, this law exists. We're just constantly being told, that no, there's no conversation here to be had. There's nothing we can do. So when we got in touch with the NSS, they were really helpful, and they gave us a lot of ammunition to go for when we escalated the complaints right to the top of the governors. Yeah,
so we didn't. This is an important point really, because we didn't know the rights for our kids, right? I think that was the first thing. We knew as parents that we wanted to stand up for them, but we didn't really know anything about any other cases. We didn't really know what we had available to us. That was our. I know you've not asked us to speak about the NSS, but I do think it's important to mention that in the absence of you guys picking it up, we wouldn't have moved it. We would have found it difficult to have moved it forward.
And the school gave you no guidance on your rights?
No. I think they have, even to this day, I think they have less idea of the rights of our children than we do. So when you offered to publish my initial piece, which I wrote, and that genuinely gave it traction, and began that conversation.
And that was December 2018.
No, you'd published it before December 2018. You'd published it, I think. It must have been October time, maybe just before September, October time.
And then could you take us through what happened after that?
So ODS, so once that blog had been published, ODST sent a very nasty letter, very bullying letter to you guys, saying that it was inaccurate, lots of other stuff in there, lots of bullying terms in there, and that you should take it down. Which again for us isn't.
Well, no, we agreed to refine one bit that related to their funding agreement. That what they couldn't do was to point out any inaccuracies, because of course it was anecdotal, and it was our the experience we had actually been recorded through the school. Literally, the governor's meeting had been recorded, so they couldn't renege on what had actually happened. So when we went out, we learnt, as it's well known, the humanists became involved in our case because what they aided us with was to understand the human rights of the children and what they were entitled to, and told us that we were entitled to the meaningful alternative. So really,
Humanists UK also got in touch with you then.
That's correct.
On the strength of the blog that you published.
Yeah. So they well, we were a little bit like the NSS. We were in conversation with the humanists because we follow and I guess stand behind the values of both. But nonetheless, the humanists helped us understand a little bit more about our
human rights law and what the children were entitled to, and
also shared the experience of some other parents. But what we hadn't realised at that point, and I don't know, and hopefully it's of interest to the audience how this case got escalated. We didn't really know that no parent had really challenged the collective worship law and the meaningful alternative and were prepared to sort of push through on the case. So the interesting thing for us is when we launched we launched our proposal for the judicial review, and we were granted the right to take it to the High Court. The press was significant for us on that day alone. I mean, it hit many of the major news channels and newspapers just by the fact that we were challenging it. So what was remarkable about that particular day, albeit a tsunami of emails and calls over that time, was just we hadn't realised how many people this affected outside of us, and how many people
felt the same way as us as well.
Yeah,
we are just umpteen amounts of support on it.
Yeah, it was genuinely overwhelming.
Did you get stories of other people having similar experiences?
Yes, so we'd had a letter written to us saying that they had also challenged it within their school, but obviously hadn't gotten as far as us, and had eventually had the open book removed from the school. So obviously the head teacher of that school felt under pressure to remove them. Yeah,
and Lizanne and I, we took a bit of a view on how engaged we were throughout this process, because we agreed to do a limited number of press interviews because we thought, neither one of us are PR people. We just wanted to be able to do what we do the right thing by our children, but we were happy to talk about the facts of the case. But we did, over a period of time, start to look at the news reviews and things on social. And once you get past a nasty demographic of extreme people, which are very much, we hope that you and your children burn in hell, and various variations of that. Once you get past those, 95% of it were people engaging. And I have to make the point, not just people that you would put under the category of atheism, people of differing religions and also of Christianity, that just said, look, we wouldn't look to exert that this isn't what we do in our school. It wasn't. It's quite interesting that many people see this as a divisive thing on behalf of atheism, and it's really not. because what Lizanne and I have been really open with is that we are huge supporters of the RE curriculum, because ultimately we want our children to understand how other people think and believe. So what we had a great amount of support on is where you have people going, well, no, regardless of your religion, belief or non-belief, for this to be exerted on young children at such an influential age is just not acceptable.
So did the case actually get heard in the High Court? Or,
no.
So never got that far. You settled before.
We did, and again we've been asked why we settled, and the clear answer is we had a clear set of criteria that we asked the school for, which never changed, and ultimately, when the court would view is, have we or haven't we been offered what it is that we asked for in the first place? And so far, they in writing they've agreed to their concessions, although they are yet to implement them. But I'm happy to be quite vocal on this. They did not want this to see the inside of a courtroom, right? And I'm absolutely certain of it, because what they stood to lose on if it made its way to the High Court, and if the decision didn't go their way, then of course the impact would have been beyond just our set of circumstances in our school. So it was made very clear to us that they, by our lawyers, that it's in their interest to settle before it hit the High Court. I personally would have liked to have seen how it played out.
Sure. So the school have basically acceded to your demands, but I understand that they have only agreed to change their assemblies to be more inclusive until your children leave the school. Is that right?
No, they haven't agreed for the assemblies to be inclusive at all. They are going to continue with the collective worship ones. However, our children and the children that are already withdrawn are going to be provided with a meaningful educational alternative.
So they've met the terms, in other words, for us as parents until our children leave the school. You're quite right. And one of the things I think the school needs to be continually challenged on, right, outside of our case, I mean by other parents, and also by the broader educational bodies that have an influence over this. If this is going to stop the second our children leave the school, what effectively the school are saying is that they are happy to keep a divisive environment for the children in their care. What a lot of the press statements the school have come out with, and the trust for that matter, they've said they continue their commitment to inclusivity. And I'm sorry, they just don't get away with saying that. And I don't care whether we've resolved this outside of court or not. You can't say you run an inclusive environment for those children and divide assemblies based upon belief. You can't say that for 20% of the kids' assemblies during the week, this is us, we believe this, we're going in this room, you don't believe it, so you go and sit in that one until we're finished. You can't call yourself an inclusive school when you do that. So whereas it is a significant win, of course it is, to get a meaningful alternative, it's still a consolation prize to inclusivity as far as I'm concerned for those kids.
So basically the schools have agreed that on the Wednesdays there will be a meaningful secular alternative to the religious collective worship. And what about in the Harvest Assembly, the end of year assembly, and the Easter?
Yes, so they've agreed that they will look at other venues before using the church. They've got a list of criteria that they need to acknowledge before using the church. They will no longer hand out Bibles at the Leavers Assembly, which is a good win.
So as far as your children are concerned, are you happy with the concessions the school has made?
Yes, it's nice that they're going to educate our children now in those periods of time. What would be nice is if they did see that the collective worship law doesn't provide an inclusive environment, and that these open book assemblies are still excluding children, and it needs to go. It needs to go.
Yeah, we've got to take on the one hand, we can't play down. It's a significant win. Right. If you look at the fact that this has never been taken to a judicial review before, It's never been given the opportunity to have exposure in the High Court, and this is the first time it's been challenged, and as a result, we've won the right for a meaningful alternative for the children, in which case we've got to take that as a huge win. But I did say at the very beginning, and Lizanne and I agreed when we took on this process, it is a consolation prize, because we can't say for it. We can't say that it's a good thing for the kids that they still have to be excluded, and it is the collective worship law which creates a divisive environment for them.
Sure, yeah. So as long as the collective worship law allows schools to have Christian-only assemblies, then children are always going to be excluded.
We also need to be clear that, Ofsted don't enforce this law.
They don't measure it.
They don't measure it. The Department of Education, they don't measure it at all. There's schools that just ignore it. And so just because we live in the Cotswolds in I don't know what you'd call it, like...
Yeah, it's predominantly
Christian, that it's okay, and it's not,
And the thing we always found remarkable, Emma, is that surely the inclusivity of the kids have got to be the most important thing. Because if you're putting the relationship of an outside body, right, it's an outside church. I mean, even if you keep the collective worship law in whatever guise you interpret it, the school are under no obligation to go to that local church and invite them in for 20% of the kids' assemblies of the week. They're under no obligation to do that whatsoever. No part of the law tells them that they need to bring in the church once a week to talk to those children. So what's always been remarkable to us is that relationship appears to be more important to keep intact than the inclusivity of the kids.
And despite the fact that the school is not a faith school, but simply a member of a Christian Academy Trust, the school has been effectively acting like a faith school in the way it's treated your children and other children who aren't Christian.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the collective worship policy that is now on the school website, it is pretty much verbatim to the collective worship policy that is in the Church of England school in the next village. So it is acting, in our opinion, it is acting like a faith school.
And Emma, we're also talking in what's happened so far. We've won this judicial review. There is a new head teacher coming into the school from next term. At this stage, we don't know whether or not that new head teacher will share the views of the previous head teacher, or whether or not she would choose to depart from it. Clearly, we've got our expectations on what that should be, and then in turn, if the meaningful alternative is applied, how well it's applied. Because there's been a lot of conversation, right? And I think broadly speaking, it's important that the school has backed down based upon their previous actions. But
you also have to say that it's ODST as well that's backed down, which I think is also very big in itself, because ODST are a big Christian body. So for them to back down as well, it is very significant.
Sure, but of course it's only for your children, and it's all going to stop once your children leave. So it's not
unless other parents step up and say that they want the same, which they are more than entitled to do. So the children that are already withdrawn as well, they have stated that they want their children to be part of this meaningful alternative. When our children leave, they are well in their rights to go, you've done it for this long, you need to carry it on now for my children, or we will open up this JR again.
Yeah. So what's really good news is that our JR, or our judicial review rather, I should say, does set a precedent. It says that this can be challenged. So what it should do is to open the door to all other parents, not just of our school, but also similar schools that are in a similar situation, or parents that are in a similar situation with similar schools. They can point to our case now and they can say, well, no, these parents have won the right. When you ask if we're pleased, when you look at it in that way, well, yes, of course, if this opens the door for other parents and as a consequence their children, then we have to take that as something that we're delighted with.
That's great. Well, what would you advise to any parents who are in a similar situation to you, looking to challenge the schools?
Don't take no for an answer. Don't take no for an answer. I mean, we sat in every level of authority within the school, the governors as well. We were in many different ways, told no, told in strong terms how it would affect us. It would be out of place for me to say some of the language and the tone that would have been used by people either within the school or associated with it, told many times not to pursue it, and got extreme views on social media, which were which would be enough to put off a lot of people. And as far as we're concerned, we kept on going back to our original intentions. We're not doing this for us, right? This is done solely with the children in mind. I'd like to say that we did it originally for other people. That would be disingenuous. We did it really 100% with our children in mind. What we were delighted with, though, when we found out the feedback of other parents, is that we learned that it is going to help other children, and it is going to change the broader picture. And I think we've grown to appreciate and be thankful for that, because of course it does open the door for other parents. So definitely don't take no for an answer, and also be balanced on it. I do genuinely hope that Lizanne and I have never been inflammatory about our views. We've always said all the way along, what we're looking for is a good balanced RE curriculum in its own context and inclusivity for the children. Everything else is just opinion based, but that's fundamentally what we want for the children.
I would also like to encourage parents as well that have been in this to follow suit, to use our case as an example, because hopefully the more people that stand up and say, no, this law isn't acceptable anymore, then hopefully it will change. It will make the sort of the government and the Department of Education take a look and go, well, yeah, okay, if so many parents are against this and don't see it as relevant, maybe we should look at changing it.
Yeah. So do you think it's time, I mean, on that point, beyond individual parents resisting the collective worship in individual schools, do you think it is time now for a change in the law?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's such an archaic law. We're also the only country in Europe that enforces it. I genuinely, just through our experience in the last year, we got a sense of it when it was just us. When you open up the conversation, it is on borrowed time.
Yeah.
All it will take is for it to hit the inside of a courtroom with the right case. And again, our case would have been a good example of that should the academy not or the trust not have met our terms. I'm 100% certain of it. But yeah, it's had its day.
It's an archaic law, and it contradicts the RE curriculum, which is taught and should be taught in a balanced way. But then when you have this collective worship law saying, well, no, Christianity is truth, your teachers may say, yes, some people believe this, some people believe that. This law is contradicting what the teachers are teaching in the RE curriculum, because they're saying, no, the Christianity is truth, and you just can't have that in this day and age. There's no room for it. There's no.
And to finish on that, Emma, we've mentioned it before, but one of the things which we found, and the reason why I do think it's on borrowed time, is because we've been told time and again by our school that they were raising our kids for life in a Christian country, and our biggest opposition to that was, well, no, we're not. We are raising our children for life in a multicultural Britain, which we're remarkably proud of. So fundamentally, we already know, just through our experience in the last year, that schools within cities can't enforce this, because of course you have children of multiple faiths, multiple religions and different beliefs. Therefore, they need to run their assemblies in an inclusive manner. And that's only going to increase. Right? Schools aren't going to be able to implement this on a practical level, which means that really collective worship for Christianity is only ever going to diminish. So it's on borrowed time. It's a matter of how quickly people step up to accelerate that process.
The writing is on the wall, if you like.
Indeed.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Lee and Lizanne Harris, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma.
That was episode 20 of the National Secular Society podcast, hosted by Emma Park. Further information about the topics discussed in this episode is available on the NSS website at secularism.org.uk/podcast. If you would like to help us challenge religious privilege and support freedom of and from religion in Britain today, why not become a member of the NSS? Full details are on the website. Thanks for listening.